Hi everyone. Thank you so much for everyone for joining for this business cast, where the topic is why is blockchain the only way to realize true data potential? I know it's a hard-hitting topic, but that's what I am the founder here at DIT Labs. I and Shalem, who is global director and product strategy here at DIT Labs, that's what we are going to explain. I'll pass it on to Shalem.
Sure. Thanks, Neeraj. Just I guess for a couple of housekeeping, if anyone has questions, we have the chat live as well. We do have a Q&A session at the end. So please feel free to put your questions there, or you can wait to the Q&A session and we'll take your questions then. So to get started, what I wanted to talk a little bit about today is, and like Neeraj mentioned, is a little bit about data and data creation and data management and data processing. But let's start with the data creation aspect. Now, what we've seen is that there's been an explosion in the fact of data and specific data creation. And data is being created as an exponential rate, which we all know, which we're all familiar with. But usually when we think about this, about data creation specifically, we think of it from a consumer perspective. So what I mean by that is we think of Facebooks and Instagram, Twitter, Google, things of this nature, where there's a direct correlation with the fact of an everyday person creating this data, which is true. But what we don't want to lose focus on is the fact of enterprises and enterprises creating data at a massive rate, and enterprises creating valuable data for them. For example, transaction data. Every day when enterprises are creating any sort of transaction, whether it be with their own customers, interdepartmental, it doesn't really matter. Whether it be logs, metrics, these are data that's being created on an everyday basis and being stored within the enterprise itself. We also have external data. For example, enterprises use third-party services all the time, and this data sits without. So for example, let's think about it as marketing. So that sits kind of a little bit outside of the enterprise as well. But again, data creation. Enterprises also use software and apps, as we all know, we all use some of them as well. And I'm talking about things like, for example, Salesforce and SAP, the things of that, IBM, etc., where they're basically create these, applications and data is being created every single day. And equally, enterprises have their own intersystems, right? For example, ERPs, and sometimes they have multiple ERPs. We've seen that where enterprises have multiple ERPs that are not always communicating with each other. But again, data is being created within those ERPs, CRMs, etc. And finally, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about IoT. We're seeing that enterprises are using IoT in various manners: scanners, RFID tags, cameras. It doesn't really matter. The fact is that every time IoT data is collected, and you think about it, we live in a smart world right now where almost everything is smart, and every time data is being collected off those devices. The point is that data is very valuable. However, data creation is one aspect, maybe the initial aspect, but what are you going to do with that data? So let's look a little bit more in terms of the investments that are happening and why enterprises are investing in data, these technologies for data creation. So $411.9 billion is going to be spent by 2025, just 3 years away, in IoT, specifically just IoT, and 22.46 billion in AI. Now, IoT, if you look at it specifically, it's a data creation, data extraction technology, right? Let's look, for example, at the freight industry. So now if I have a truck that's moving from location A to B, let's say to location C, and there on beyond. Now, data that's collecting on that truck, whether it be temperature data, whether it be the vehicle's fleet maintenance data, whether it be driver behavior data, whatever it may be, the fact that data is being collected and created. And if you look at the graphic on the right-hand side, what we see is that cloud computing, AI, software, IoT, these are huge data collection and AI data cleansing front-end technologies. But if you look at the bottom, towards the bottom, we have like for example, hyper automation at the bottom, 6% comparative to cloud computing, 6% being spent on hyper automation. And this is where we're seeing a problem where we're investing a whole bunch in data creation, data cleansing. But what about processing? What are you going to do with that data? I have all this IoT data. Why am I doing that? Why am I investing this money? And what am I going to do with this data once I have it? So why are companies investing into this? And it's fueled by a different couple of factors. But for example, AI adoption and 5G emergence. So these are technology or technical emergence that have happened in the industry and investments that are driving this. We're all aware 5G is here. AI has been readily adopted. If we look at sensors, for example, and I'll go back to IoT, if we look at like sensor costs, they've drastically gone down comparative to 5-10 years ago. So we're not seeing a technical constraint in terms of investing in these technologies to collect data. But from a business perspective, again, collecting it, but why do you collect it? Well, one thing is regulations. We've seen several bunch of regulations that have come in. Again, let's look at the freight industry and let's look at something very specific in terms of moving product and everyday consumer product, let's say food. Now, these are temperature controlled and they have to go through several meat regulations in terms of, let's say, temperature sensitivity. If it had dropped out of a temperature range, acceptable temperature range, regulations are now being put onto enterprises to make sure that they're assessing these metrics correctly and exposing it to the consumer, all for the fact of the quality of product. This is becoming very, very important. And track and trace is becoming important not only to enterprises because of their own customers, which may be enterprises, but the everyday customer as well. We are now demanding to understand exactly where our products came from. And I'm not saying just from a geographical perspective, specifically, again, if we look at food, let's say strawberries, which farm did it come from? If I'm looking in the mining sector, I'm looking at my cell phones or other product technology, fiber optic cables, which mines am I getting my earth material from? And the track and trace and the provenance towards that is becoming very, very important. And this is that digital transformation that's happening within the industry. So I talked a little bit about why it's happening and why people are demanding this. But really, again, there's a struggle to extract the value of data. So collecting data is one aspect of a greater puzzle piece. Again, I have IoT data, and you look at specifically IoT data, it's very, very specific, and it's a whole bunch of data. But I need something to process that. Essentially, if I have poor data quality, what's going to happen is I'm going to have poor business outputs and I'm not going to be able to make business decisions. And for me, understanding, and again, if I look at the freight industry, it's not about understanding, what happened 5 minutes ago or what happened 1 hour ago. No, I want to know right now if a product has, breached a temperature range. I need to know that right now because there's a potential risk to the product and I cannot take this to the consumer or the enterprise. And what's happened is that because we don't have this processing, the data quality may be poor, or maybe the data quality is there, but it's just the processing is not there. And therefore, we're not having actionable outputs. It's taking way too long. And we've seen this every day. Let's look at our supply chains right now. If we look at let's look at pandemic, but even prior to the pandemic, supply chains were hit very, very hard. And obviously there's obvious reasons during the pandemic, but we're still seeing that it's taking very long just to get this information and nearly impossible. If you think about it, next time you go to the grocery store and you're picking up certain products where you're shopping, think about it. If you wanted to find out where that came from, again, let's say, for example, strawberries, maybe there's any sort of chemicals used on that. You want to know why, and you want to know where it came from and what was used and the transportation method to get to you, because you want to understand the quality of that product before you purchase it. We're finding that the data findings conflict with the course of action as well. And that is becoming a huge problem, because if the data is saying one thing, but then your course of action is saying a different thing, you're not having the full view of data. You're not having the full visibility of what's really happening on the field to make business decisions. And this is becoming very, very complex, difficult to understand. And enterprises are spending a whole bunch of money trying to understand this. And there's minute jobs being created just to tackle one portion of this. But what's really missing is a processing engine there. So what's the need? Basically, the need is to understand data, but not understand data at a high level. We need access to granular data. But then you need access to granular data, but you need to make that and convert that and use that to make business outcomes. And that's what's the need right now. And what we're seeing is there's a huge gap that's happening. So what are the challenges? So I mentioned broken supply chains, and I talked a little bit about the pandemic and what's happened through there as well. But what about sustainability? If you wanted to understand, what are we doing with, our Earth, and how is, for example, greenhouse gas emissions happening, and when it's happening, and how we can mitigate that, how we can reduce that. What about when we're moving products? I mentioned, let's say, for example, on a vehicle from location A to location B, is it taking the optimal route? Are we spending too much? Are we polluting the earth because it's not taking the optimal route? This is all becoming very, very important in terms of our future. You are seeing in many organizations, many enterprises where they're going green, and they have a passport, a product passport that they're creating to achieve these goals. And when we have lack of data or data breach, or maybe not lack of data, but the processing of that, what we're seeing is that traceability and provenance has been suffered. Again, if you wanted to understand where your products are coming from, specifically from a particular, whether it be a mine, a farm, a factory, wherever it may be, and how it got to you, it's very, very difficult to understand that. And when I say you, I'm not only talking about everyday consumer, I'm talking about enterprises as well. And what this has all resulted into is an impact of into shortages and delays, essentially. And we've all experienced that as well. And that clear gap between data collection, cleansing, but then also the processing is what's causing this. I'd like to hand it over to Neeraj right now. And Neeraj, what you can do is maybe talk a little bit more about the data aspect of that. And of course, I know I've highlighted the solution. I'm sorry, the problem, but people want to know, so what's the solution?
No, thanks, Shalan. So I think by now, one thing is for sure that there is some problem, right? With all that money which has been invested in IoTs and, as Shalan said, data collection, be it even AI, which is also a type of, at least for enterprise, it's type of a data collection technology. If it would have been working, then we would have not been having all the supply chain problem that what we are having today. So by now, one thing is clear, it's all about data, right? Like it's everything, the world we are living, it's all about data. The better you organize your data, the better the decision you can take. But there are some big problems in the way enterprises stores and manage data. And some of these problems are what you see on your screen are data silos, right? Where data tables cannot talk to each other. Data silos is something where, like, wherever you store the data, like data tables, those are not smart tables that they can talk to each other. Data lock, right? Where multiple organizations cannot get control of data at the same time. It's just hard, like the technology doesn't allow you to do it. And above all, data optimization and data processing engines used by enterprises are completely outdated. You see enterprises all around you. The back-end process is not that modernized what their front thing are. Like, what Shalan mentioned, right? Your Facebooks, Twitters are way, way more advanced than the way enterprises or the software what enterprises are using to manage and process data behind. And that's what it opens up a place where a whole lot of more innovation is needed. And let me try to explain you what I mean by it on the next slide. So what you see on your screen is a typical architecture by which organizations access data. In the diagram, O1, O2, O3, and O4 are 4 organizations which are trying to access data from table 1 and table 2. Now to access data, they need to go through some network like internet, right? Here in this case, it is internet. And then they reach to a data processing engine, right? So it, like in another words, there's a front end, there's a middleware, and then there's a back end, right? So data processing engine is generally sits at the middleware, right? Which processes the request and then sends back a response. So this data processing engine, which in turns reach to table 1 and table 2. And what is table 1 and table 2? In this case, table 1, suppose it stores like fuel, right? Fuel rates. Table 2 is storing, suppose, lane charges, right? So the data processing engine reaches to table 1 and table 2 to get data. It processes it, and then accordingly, it needs to save back the data into the table. So this process of fetching the data from the table and then putting it back into the table, right, is a very resource intensive process and is full of errors. And I'll say this thing again, this process is really full of errors. And if you've worked in enterprise, you would have heard a word called reconciliation, right, where companies run lots of reconciliation job overnight. And why? Because of these errors. So basically, because of those errors, right, in fetching and putting data back, every organization needs to run reconciliation job to make sure tables within the database are in sync. They are all synchronized. So you need to run reconciliation job overnight. And this reconciliation process is a huge wastage of time, money, and resources. And therefore, this world needs a better data management engine. And I can't think of anything better than blockchain. Let's talk more about it on the next slide. Blockchain is the world's most advanced technology to store and manage data. What blockchain does it brings the data processing engine, and the network all at the same level. It is like data storage, data optimization, and data management, all those things in a single box, what you see in front of you. It just not only allows you to store all your data at the same level and not in separate tables like databases, but at the same time, smart contracts, right, are very deeply integrated with the data for data optimization and data management. So unlike in the previous architecture where organizations were first reaching out to data processing engine, which in turn was getting the data from the tables, now what you see here, organization can access and control data directly. And this gives organization data freedom like never ever before. Now, no more anyone can hold organizations on ransom for their own data. So we'll see a quick example that how we did for Walmart on the next slide. So far, I'm pretty sure one way or the other, you would have heard our story on how we have reduced the disputes between Walmart and their carriers from 70% to less than 1% today. If not, I'll recommend to go to our website, and there are a bunch of blogs and case studies even by from Harvard Business Review, which is a great insight at what all things we have achieved from the business side. But the question is always asked that what's the reality? How did we achieve that? Like, it's a huge success. And not only we have reduced the disputes, but at the same time today, Walmart pays approximately more than 95% of their invoices without any human touch. And this is what we call hyper automation on steroids. The main reason why we were able to achieve it is the unique blockchain architecture of DLS Track. DLS Track is a low-code platform, and with the help of blockchain, it allows organization to store all your data on a single ledger, which gets deeply integrated with the smart contracts. For example, in case of Walmart, to calculate invoices, Walmart needs data like fuel rate, lane charges, accessorial, load information, discount, taxes, IoT, right? Like especially IoT, right? To to know where the trucks are, and a lot more data just to calculate like one invoice. So what we do is we allow Walmart and all its carriers to not only store all their data on the chain, but at the same time, we allow them to configure the smart contract. That is more important. It's not just the storing of the data, but the smart contract, which is deeply integrated with the data. We allow carriers and Walmart to configure them, which in turn governs how the data is used. And this is what gives ultimate power of auditability and visibility to all the users of the network, which in turn reduces disputes among them and creates a sense of trust. So far, Walmart has paid more than $1 billion using our network and continues to do so every day. So to conclude, today, world is spending billions on data collecting technology like AI, IoT, RFID, scanners, and many more, thinking that it will solve their problems. But organization keeps on missing that just the data collection alone cannot solve the problem. Like you install the IoT, that will not solve all your problem. It will collect your data, but what to do next? They need a very powerful data optimization and data management engine to really solve the problem. Otherwise, how much you spend, right? And this is what we at DIT Labs, we keep on hearing the story and again, right? Like where enterprises spending on IoT scanners and that data goes and sits somewhere and they don't even know what to even do with it. Right? So you need a very solid data management, data optimization engine, and there's no better technology than blockchain to solve world supply chain chaos what we have today. On that note, this is Neeraj, inventor of enterprise blockchain and founder at DIT Labs. Everyone, thank you so much. We'll be back next month with some other topic. Any feedback, anything, feel free to let us know.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.